This video is going to be the first in a series of videos getting back to the basics of survival. During this Survival Basics video series, we're going to cover shelter, fire, and water. Now, in some of these topics, we're going to dive really deep, but remember, this is still a basic survival video series. In this video, we're going to discuss the first layer of shelter and site selection, which is going to lay a foundation for our next video, learning how to set up various shelter configurations. Then we're going to move on to fire and learn what fire is, how to locate and use materials to start a fire, and how to use 5 methods of starting a fire. And finally, we're going to move on to water, how to find it and process it in the field, and the convenience of using commercial water filters. Now, with all that being said, let's lay the foundation for the next video. Let's learn about shelter and find out what shelter is. According to the dictionary, shelter is defined as a place of giving temporary protection from bad weather or danger. When you're in a survival situation, cover from the elements is a high priority. Start looking for shelter as soon as possible. We're going to go over shelter site selection a little bit later in this video, but right now let's discuss clothing. Your clothing is considered your first layer of shelter. Depending on your environment, your clothing protects you from sun, insects, wind, rain. And I'm not going to go into the seasonal clothing aspect, but still at a minimum, you should dress for the occasion of the environment that you're going to participate in outdoor activities. Wearing long pants and a lightweight long sleeve shirt whenever you venture into the woods is highly recommended. A few of the main reasons is that it gives you protection from the insects, the sun, and the wind. I don't know about you, but mosquitoes love me just as much as Jesus does, and 10 minutes in the sun and I am fried like bacon. You want to wear relatively loose-fitting, long-sleeve clothing, which allows you to stay cooler in hotter environments and warmer in cooler environments. In hotter environments, removing your clothing will cause you to lose sweat and require more sweat to cool you off, possibly contributing to dehydration. So when it comes to survival, it's okay to be stinky. Now let's discuss the pros and cons of different clothing materials. Cotton clothing is incredible in warm weather environments. One characteristic of cotton is that it soaks up any moisture. I'll demonstrate this characteristic during the water section by showing you how cotton material can wick and filter your dirty water. I've read in a couple of survival blogs where wet cotton t-shirts do not protect against sunburn, and by living in Alaska for 4 years, I found out firsthand that once cotton gets wet, it loses all of its insulated properties. Damp cotton clothing must be dried out in colder environments because left on in the cold, cotton can lead to hypothermia. And yes, it is still possible to catch hypothermia in the summer. Although rare, it can still happen. Cotton is excellent in warm weather environments and not the best in cold climates, but believe it or not, wool is ideal for either. Wool is highly breathable, it wicks moisture away from your body, and it keeps you dry. It's naturally antibacterial and helps keep you from getting stinky. My favorite thing about wool is that it keeps you warm even when it's wet. Wool retains its insulated properties when completely soaked. As an added bonus, wool is anti-wrinkle, so you always look your best even in a survival situation. The only downfall to wool is that it's heavy, and when it's wet, it's very cumbersome. Now, there are many types of other synthetic materials out there that have their own pros and cons, but for the sake of time, we're just going to cover these natural materials for now. Now that we know the definition of shelter and we have taken a look at clothing as our first layer of shelter, let's dive into shelter site selection. This is going to lay the groundwork for when we build our shelters in the next video. According to the U.S. Army Survival Handbook, when considering shelter site selection, 2 prerequisites must be met. Number 1, it must contain the materials you need to make the type of shelter you need. Number 2, it must be large enough and level enough for you to lie down comfortably. Now, on the site that you selected, you must also consider if it's suitable for signaling. Does it provide protection from wild animals? Are there any dead trees that could fall? And is it free from insects, reptiles, and poisonous plants? You must also remember the problems that could arise in your environment, such as avoiding flash flood areas in the foothills, avoid avalanche and rock slide areas in the mountainous terrain, and avoid sites near bodies of water that are below the high water mark. Other aspects of site selection that you want to consider are your proximity to drinking water and your availability of firewood. You don't want to walk a mile just to collect some water to walk a mile back to boil it. The same goes with collecting firewood. Dragging firewood back to camp can be tiring, and you don't want to use up all your calories collecting firewood. One crucial and often overlooked aspect of site selection that I just mentioned is the presence of dead trees, better known as widowmakers. Most people look around the camp to make sure they don't have one near them, but they don't think to look 50 or 60 feet away that could fall on them as well. When the wind picks up, the dead tree can potentially be blown over, falling into your shelter, killing or injuring you. Pay attention to dead standing trees in relation to your site. Now you could take this dead tree, you could push it over or knock it down, you could cut it down, you can add to your firewood collection. Remember, safety is paramount when selecting your site. Make sure there are no dead trees close to your shelter. Your proximity to water will contribute to increased encounters with animals and those notorious little vampires that everybody knows, mosquitoes. Being closer to water will help in another area of survival that we're really not going to cover in this series, but it helps in the area of food. Being closer to water will allow you to fish, set snares, catch frogs, snakes, and just overall increase your ability to collect food during a survival situation. Food will be gone over in detail on its own series in the future, but also keep in mind that the closer to water also brings predators. Mosquitoes and biting insects can be a considerable nuisance. The best way to control them is with a very smoky fire. Burning certain weeds and trees helps control insects, for example, dog fennel and American beautyberry, which they both grow throughout the North American continent, helps control insects. You can rub these weeds onto your skin or your clothing, or you can lay dog fennel down in the coals of a fire to give off a smoke that really helps. Burning pine and other resinous trees can help control insects as well. When selecting the site for your shelter, you want to make sure that you're not in an area where flash floods will make you run for higher ground in the middle of the night. You don't want to select a location where water can flood your shelter. When you choose a site near the water, you want to be able to see a high water mark on the trees. This mark is from previous flooding, so try to select a site above this high water mark. If at all possible, in mountainous regions, you do not want to choose a shelter near an area prone to avalanches during the wintertime and areas that could potentially produce rock slides. Mountainous areas are very prone to falling rocks, so try to be very careful when selecting a shelter location near a mountainous area. Now that we've laid a good foundation, in the next video in this series, we're going to demonstrate various shelter setups. I hope this video was helpful. I'll see you next time. God bless you.